So in our open topic today, we'll be ranking the named Ringwraiths, all 9 of them from best to worst. And we've each brought our own lists, and we're going to compare and have a debate on our choices and just see how different they are. So we're going to have 5 different rankings today. I guess the easiest way is just to start off with one of our lists, and then person after can kind of give their list and then compare to see where they're different and then kind of give our reasons why. So let's have Ian start with his ranking of the 9 Ringwraiths, and maybe just go like a brief description of your choices from 1 to 9, and then we'll have the second person go.
Okay, I guess I'll start from the top. That's kind of, I think, the one that we all pretty much agreed on anyway, having seen all the lists. At number 1, I have the Witch King. I feel like that one is pretty self-explanatory. You know, with the crown, he can fight, he can cast magic well, he has heroic strike, he can get 3 points of might, which I think he might be the only one of the Ringwraiths who can do that now. I think so. So he can just do everything, and he can do everything pretty well. And he also scales well to different points levels, right? Depending on the kit you run him with, right? Like, it's not uncommon just to see him on the horse with the crown, right? You don't need to go for the full 200-something points and give him the Fell Beast, right? So I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. He's great. My second place, I gave to Kamul the Easterling, which I feel like is a bit more controversial. And now that I'm saying it out loud, you know, maybe it's not the best pick for second place, but the thing that I found alluring to him is he's the only other Wraith that has strike. And I think we all know how good Fell Beasts can be. And the one thing that's holding back Fell Beasts in this edition, why you don't see them as much, is because most of the Wraiths don't have strike. So because he can do that, and he can like boost his stats up too to like fight 6, so he's pretty good on a Fell Beast. So if you want to run a Ringwraith on a Fell Beast, I think it's a pretty big toss-up between him and the Witch King. So if you want that role filled, I think he does that really well. Third place, I have the Betrayer. Same kind of thing. I haven't gotten a chance to run him on a Fell Beast in a while, but I think he does it very well. Kind of like a mini Spider Queen, like minus the fight value. But the bigger thing is just having him in a supporting role in a Harad list. It's disgusting. That reroll ability is it's horrendous. Yeah. Fourth place, I have the Shadow Lord. This is purely because shooting lists are very prominent right now, and he stopped shooting. Also, I think he's one of the more reasonable rates at casting, right? He's got good values at casting, I think. Can somebody confirm that?
He's got about average casting. He's like up there with the I feel like there's 2 tiers. I feel like there's the combat race, the Betrayer, Kamul, Knight of Umbar, and then the rest of them.
Yeah. So he's not a combat one. His magic is reasonable compared to the other ones. Yeah. And then what do I have in 5? In 5, I have the Undying. You know, he's the casting Wraith. If you want a Wraith just to cast and you don't feel like going for the Witch King, you can go for him. He's just fine. He does what he needs to do. Yeah. I feel like with that one and then the next one, you could probably like swap them either way. It doesn't make a huge difference to me. So the next one being in 6th place, the Dark Marshal. And I feel like I've said this before on the podcast, but if you want a Wraith who can do everything just okay, go for him. Like he's kind of very, very average to me. Like he has the fight 6, which is nice, so you can make him a combat Wraith on the Fell Beast. He also has the banner ability, so then he's supporting your army. So he can do everything, but he can do everything just kind of okay. So around the middle of the list seems fine to me. And then I got to be honest, guys, the last 3, it's kind of like, they're all kind of gimmicky or just like not great. So in 7, I have the Tainted, and I always mix up which special rule. Which one is his special rule?
The Tainted?
He's the one that can prevent warriors from benefiting from heroics and standfast.
Yeah. Okay. That's why
he's got a second one, but that's his will costing one.
Yeah. So actually, never mind. The last 2, they're both kind of garbage. This one is actually like he's actually not bad. He has reasonable casting. He has that special rule, which can be very helpful. And you can also build around that special rule and do specific builds. Like I think, Charles, you kind of I think you probably played around with that maybe with the catapults, have you? Maybe?
No, but I've seen people use it with great beasts.
Oh, interesting. Stop them from charging? Anyway, so he has like the specific ways you can build around it and make him useful, but that's about it. The next one I have is the Knight of Umbar. And I gotta be honest with you, he's supposed to be a combat wraith, but he just like doesn't do it very well. Like if he had heroic strike, he'd probably be way higher in the list. Because he doesn't, it's very restricted what he can do. And yeah, his magic casting isn't good. And then in last place, I have the Dwemer. Like, what can you say? He's got a two-handed weapon and only that for whatever reason, so he's terrible in combat. And then, his special rule is just pretty lackluster. Like, you're spending will to have a 50% chance to make the opponent use more resources. Just doesn't seem like a great trade to me. Yeah. Thoughts?
Richard, do you want to go over your ranking and you can comment on Ian's and like how yours is different?
Okay, so I guess ours are pretty similar. The way I categorized it was based on the thinking of, competitive choices. So, they could obviously fit in different army types, and some are more flexible than others, but as long as they still have a competitive option, I still rank them fairly high. The Witch King, I would say that I agree with Ian's points. And I think one more thing is that it's just the customization. I think being able to be so flexible as well as being really efficient is key, because a lot of these other ones are maybe good in specific lists or just not good at all. But the Witch King is good in multiple different packages and ways that you can build them. So he's just top tier. I have the Shadow Lord a little higher than Ian, just because I feel like he's still pretty, I guess, common in a lot of metas. I understand that not all metas will have shooting, but, I think us and a lot of other podcasts have talked about how strong shooting is. So this is like the evil's blinding light, and we all know how good that is. So it's just really good, and there's no replacement for it. There's no other model where you're like, oh, can I take something else in lieu of the Shadow Lord? So he doesn't have that replacement. Third is Betrayer, same as Ian. I think he has more of a niche role, but he's very, very competitive in a Haradrim list. I have Kamul lower. Similar to the Betrayer, he is mostly taken in an Easterling list, but I just don't feel like he's an auto take, or he's taken even as much as the Betrayer in the Haradrim list, but he is solid. And then the next few, Undying Dark Marshal, similar to Ian's rankings as well. And they are pretty interchangeable. Oh, and I guess Tainted is the same as well at number 7. Number 8 and number 9 I have switched because I really hate the Knight of Umbar. So he's my last place, because he really doesn't do anything. Like, yeah, he's supposed to be good at combat, but he's just terrible. Like, aside from giving him Heroic Strike to buff him, what they could also do is make his ability actually useful by doing the copy after a Heroic Strike or something like that. Because at this point, it's like any hero with Heroic Strike is still going to just nullify his special rule. So, and he's a bad caster, so what is he really doing? At least the Dwemer Lake, as bad as he is, it's like you're going to kind of have fun with him and do something different. You're kind of being doing something similar to Grima Wormtongue, trying to suck resources. And I feel like even though it's not the best ability, you might be able to build it in a way where a list where you really punish the opponent somehow for not having enough might. And even if it's giving up a little bit of efficiency, maybe that's the kind of ability you want. Because at least he does something. The Knight of Umbar just doesn't do anything. So that's my list.
You may have convinced me on the last two there.
Okay, so I think all of us have the Witch King first. It's obviously my first rank as well, because for many reasons, the versatility can't be matched. I have Kamul as the second one.
Wait. Sorry to interrupt you, Charles. Actually, I think you have the exact same list as Ian, except for the last two.
Oh! Yeah, I do. Wow, I did not notice that. Okay.
Great minds, something. And then if I'm switching the last two to Richard's order, then do we have the same list?
I guess I'll just kind of go over the picks that I think might be a little more uncommon. So I think I see a lot of people put Shadow Lord in second or third. I might even seen it first, but the Shadow Lord is really, really valued, I feel like, in competitive play. I put it as fourth, just below Betrayer. I still think it's really good. So the reason why I did that is because I feel like when you put the Betrayer in a Serpent Horde list, it's a win condition. He's one of your strategies to win with. He's the one that gives all of your rerolls. When you put a Shadow Lord in a list, it might help you depending on your opponent and depending if you start far away and you have to march out your opponent. That's what makes a difference for me. It's very small. I put Betrayer before Shadow Lord just because you're going into the game already knowing what he's going to do. Shadow Lord, you don't know for sure if he's going to help you. And then the next two are kind of just solid ones, but not auto takes. Like Undying, I wish his ability that costs a will was better. Because essentially it costs a will to do it, and because it costs a will to do it, you need multiple casters in the list to make it worth it. So I actually think that you take the Undying for his secondary ability, which is the using Will as Fate, which is kind of weird. The Dark Marshal is really good. I actually really like a Fight 6 hero on a Fell Beast. It's just his banner only affects warriors, and that's kind of what puts a sour taste in my mouth. I think if it was just a banner effect, or even a banner, he would be like 2 ranks up. The Tainted, I think, is a little bit underrated. I have him lower because his benefits are really situational, but I can see situations where he would be good. I played against a player who used it with Great Beasts, and I think it was great because essentially on turns that you have priority, you can ensure that your models will go first because neither side can benefit from heroic moves in that 6-inch bubble. So on turns where you have priority, it's almost like it's guaranteed. And then for the last two, I think similar to what Richard said, Dormer Lake is slightly more useful, but they're both really bad. Like when you have a 2-handed weapon, and this hasn't been mentioned yet, but Dormer Lake has no might. So a hero that always has to go 2-handed with no might, he basically can never be in combat, or you never want him to be in combat, which means you would never take a Fell Beast because Fell Beast generally you want it for the monstrous charge, right? Generally. His debuff is kind of nice, and what puts him slightly above Knight of Umbar is it does synergize with Angmar lists, because Angmar is all about stacking debuffs, right? You know, you take the Shade, you take Barrow Weiss to weaken enemies, and you have a lot of terror. I think Dormer Can really synergize with that. Not efficiently, because you don't get a lot for what you pay, but at least it adds to your army, adds to your strategy. Knight of Umbar is another one of those similar to the Undying, where his secondary special rule is better than his primary. Like his armor that he doesn't lose will when he wins a fight. It kind of tells you something when your secondary rule is better than your primary. But you wouldn't take the Knight of Umbar just for his armor. It's not good enough. That's what makes him last place. Alex?
Okay, so my list is a little bit flipped around in a couple of spots from some of you guys. First is the Witch King. Second is Kamul, because he can still strike, and even though he's not taken maybe as much as he used to be, if you want to put a Nazgul on a Fell Beast, he's probably the one to do it with. He's pretty decent that way. 3 and 4 are a little bit interchangeable. I put the Tainted up pretty high by comparison to you guys, mostly because I look at his special rule about being able to nullify opponent's ability for their troops to respond to heroic actions. Incredibly useful in situations, specifically in Angmar, when you win priority. If you play one of those very orc-heavy Angmar lists where you have some spirit heroes and Angmar, you're going to have a ton of orcs. And so if you can nullify your opponent's ability to heroic move when you've won priority, you're really opening up space for your orcs to go and trap things, for to get your heroes in there. So I actually really like his special rule. Of course, my analysis is relatively theoretical. 4, which could have also been 3 to an extent, the Betrayer, just because he buffs the entire army around him, because there's so much in the way of poison weapons and poison arrows. In with the Haradrim, he can make them really lethal from distance. 5, I've got the Undying, probably because I've still got a bit of a soft spot for the Undying, because I was a big Undying player in the last edition. He's a very good spellcaster. He's resilient just because he can use his Will as Fate still, and that doesn't cost him a will point to activate. His first special rule doesn't really do anything anymore because you're going to need minimum 3 spellcasters just to make it do anything. That you got to spend a will point, but it wasn't huge for me in the last edition either. After that, I've got the Dark Marshal just because he's Fight 6, so he'll at least be above the troop level in most games. The banner effect, to me, is the biggest deal, just because, again, buffing his troops, really big banner, which when you've got a ton of orcs is really useful. I put the Shadow Lord down at 7th, partially just because when I play Mordor, I have, of course, played against very bow-heavy armies, and it becomes a bit of a struggle to get into combat fast enough but I often find that if I can move up fast enough, take advantage of terrain, having Pall of Darkness isn't my greatest concern. And then, of course, the last two just got the Knight of Umbar and the Dwemer Lake. The Knight of Umbar, his special rule sounds nice, but the way it's worded, he just gets outstruck. He doesn't have heroic strike anymore. He can't fight against standard troops. His role was very much as targeting heroes, but when he can't even match them, he's just almost never worth the points. And then the Dwemer Lake, because he has no might and he might as well be unarmed. It's bad. It doesn't matter which way you want to put it. I think they could both be fixed, but yeah, as they are now, those two at the bottom, they're bad.
Matt, you good?
Yeah, all right. So I am here to make enemies with my list, and I don't know how many of your listeners are going to enjoy it. Let's go, though. It's going to be a roller coaster. Are we right? So what's funny is, like, when I first heard this topic, I was like, okay, I played a lot of Ringwraiths in the last edition, and the more I read into this and looked up what I was going to say, the more I enjoyed doing this. So I'm going to go in ascending order. We're going to start at the bottom. I kind of got these guys in 3 tiers here, all right? Numbers 8 and 9, 9 being the Knight of Umbar, 8 being the Dwemer Lake. I'm not going to repeat what any of you said. Go back to the summer of 2018. You're the old edition, and that's all I really got to say. They're just not that great. They were amazing before, and right now they're just bottom tier. Number 7 for me is going to be the Shadow Lord. Ooh, I know, he's so deep down dark there in Moria. But I just think with the addition of so many of these new mobile scenarios, like command the battlefield, weird stuff you're moving around, I just think he's in the pretty much middle tier here. I don't think he's bad at all. I just feel like in the last edition, he's one of those models you always take to conventions if you're running Mordor, His casting's good, his might, will, and fate's pretty good, but other than that 6-inch bubble, what are you going to do? You might be playing a melee-heavy all-mounted Rohan with Goblin Town, Return of the King Legendary Legion, Far Harad, half-troll spam. He's literally useless in all those matchups, and these are competitive tournament armies. I guess I might not have been going to conventions as much as people the last few years. None of us have really been the last 2 years. But maybe I'm wrong about the meta and what I see out there, but I feel like there's a lot of heavy melee things when conventions are fully on the rise again that are going to take over the meta. I don't think shooting is going to be as predominant as we think it is right now. So going up to number 6, and this is going to be a fun one. So how is it pronounced where the Easterlings come from? Is it Rune or Run?
It's Rune.
Rune? Okay. So from the land of Rune, Khamul overrated the Easterling. I think Khamul has always been one of the most overrated Easterling, or Ringwraith models. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but I'm coming from a perspective where when I'm thinking about these Ringwraiths, most of the time I'm taking them on fell beasts and I'm not taking them on horses, okay? When you're taking Khamul, what do you want to do with him? You want to kill things, right? You're probably putting him on a fell beast most of the time. If you don't, I don't really understand what you're going for because you have better options for killing. I mean, when I'm looking at the profile, he could increase his attacks. He could increase his strength, right? But these are things that are just better when you have a fell beast anyway. So to me, they're honestly mostly useless. The strike is great, of course, and upping your fight value is great. But honestly, I feel like Khamul is somebody who always has somebody who could do what he does a little bit better. If you really want to kill stuff and assassinate things, the Betrayer's out there. I know he doesn't have strike, but that's the only thing that he doesn't have. If you want more might, the Witch King's there. The Witch King has a Crown of Morgul and killing power too. I just think Khamul is actually a detriment to the Easterlings as well, because with that army, you want your numbers up, and he's just going to cost you a lot of points. I think he's, in my opinion, the most overrated model since I got back into the game out of these 9. I still don't think he's bad. Don't get me wrong. Getting your will back by munching down troops is excellent, but I think we've all run big heroes enough that eventually smashing yourselves in a troop repeatedly, you're not just going to get that dice roll that you need, and eventually it's going to be a roll-off that you lose, and he's going to have some issues. I just had a lot to say about him because I've always thought it was so funny how people are so obsessed with him. Going up to number 5 is a Tainted. I'm not going to go into too much. I think Seeping Decay is pretty cool. I think it's a buff that people don't talk about because a lot of times what you want to do is swarm enemy Ringwraiths to try to kill them off the board. And he has a device built into him that prevents people from wanting to add models onto him by possibly taking wounds, right? So I thought that was pretty interesting. Fighting off heroic moves and stand fast, especially at the end of the game. I just think that in the hands of a very skilled player, he's very underrated. I think he could be really good. And then again, he's got great might, will, and fate, and his casting's solid. Number 4, I got the Undying. Still hard to kill. I think he suffered a little bit this edition because, there's not all Fell Beast lists and there's like a little bit less to cast. But at the end of the day, you got the Witch King, you got Carduce, so he's still going to be completely useful. Not much else to say against him. One of the only knocks I do have on him, nobody said this yet, but he's a hero of valor. So if you're taking him in the Mordor list, you willingly have to sacrifice putting the Witch King in your list to make him your leader if your point is to keep him alive with his fate rolls. So it's kind of a weird situation where I've written lists in Mordor and I'm like, I'm taking out the Witch King because he's sturdier, but the Witch King could strike and you could just put 3 fate on him and he's got defense 8 anyway. How much trouble are you putting your Ringwraith in that he needs like 20 will to use his fate? I think the Witch King is fine. And again, I hate to say this with all these models, but like if you're comparing him to the Witch King, Dark Marshal, I have him at number 3. I understand it's a little bit high up there, but basically my 2 through 7 choices are all just a little bit off. I think his 6-inch banner is amazing. He's got the fight 6 built in. And his casting's decent. I really like him. There's not much else to say. He's straightforward, and I think he's just a great, good buff troop. I think he's one of the Ringwraiths I wouldn't mind taking on a horse to save some points. Bumping up your numbers, keeping that Mordor bonus is really important because it's excellent. Again, what means a lot to me is taking these guys in the list that they're supposed to be in too and how useful they are there, which is why I'm going with number 2, the Betrayer. Incredible buff for his army. I've seen this guy melt defense 7 lines with his rerolls on poison weapons against people. Like I've seen Khazad-dûm lines go to pieces. His might, will, and fate is good. His casting's not great, but we have a new scenario in this book recently, Assassination. He's a perfect assassin as well. One bad roll and he's taken someone off the field. One bad roll being the enemy who he's rolling against. I think he's an amazing assassin, the best buffer out of any of these Ringwraiths. And fights 5, he can't strike. Okay. But if you're fighting anybody who's fight 4 and below, you have no trouble just throwing him into troops and just wiping him off the field. I think he's underrated as well. Number 1, the Witch King. I don't have a lot to say. The only thing I have to say is that nobody has really talked about the fact that he's the only hero of Legend Ringwraith. All the other ones are Valor. I think a lot of evil lists suffer from the courage checks at the end of the game. And I know the Ringwraiths have good courage, but he guarantees you 1 pass, and then you have the high courage after that. I think that's an excellent thing. He was my favorite in the last edition when some of the other ones were considered OP. And now they gave him the Crown of Morgul, which is ridiculous. I can't tell you how much I love the Witch King. But there's my list. Let's hear what everybody else has to say about other people's choices.
I just want to say the point that you made on the Undying, that's pretty on theme for our topic today, Fog of War. Because if you play him with the Witch King, man, that would be a tough secondary hero to kill. I guess it seems like you all rank Shadow Lord lower than I did. Even though I think generally the community values him quite a lot, especially you, Matt. I think you put him quite low. But I guess my defense for this is that if it is a standard D6 Mordor list with a bunch of marches across the list, okay, I can kind of see where he's not the Witch King where you just throw the Shadow Lord in every single list. I agree with that. I think people need to think a bit more in which list to put him in. I guess where I'm thinking is if you build a more specialized list, you start adding in Dark Denizens of Mirkwood with spiders, low defense models, or contingent of goblins, or things like that where you're really, really scared of shooting, which there's a lot of evil armies that you're just terrified of coming up against a shooting list, especially if you're playing a good versus evil tournament. So I think that's why I really value Shadow Lord, and it's just a unique ability, because the other stuff, as good as the Betrayer is, and Khamûl is, those are just killing power, right? And you can always find killing power elsewhere.
I feel like the Shadow Lord would be more valued if he was in another list with maybe mounted heroes you want to protect or more expensive warriors. I think you thinking as allying other armies in with Mordor, other contingents, that makes sense how he could be really valuable. I think maybe we're just thinking more context of pure Mordor or what there is in Mordor, because normally you think, yes, I'll save 5 or 6 Black Minorians from being shot down because I have the Shadow Lord. You can just use those points to get more, I guess. It's that's the kind of, you're weighing your options, right? Would you rather have protection from shooting or just have more models? But if you're allying, then you'll have other stuff from other lists that are more fragile that you would want to protect. So I can understand that.
So one point I want to make is I feel like I thought a lot about the Shadow Lord. And again, I threw him in the middle of the pack. And if I got him assigned to me to use at a random tournament, I'd be like, okay, not so bad. But I feel like playing shooting heavy armies the last few years, I see some games where you just don't get a lot of wounds on your opponent. And I really realize the value of knowing that the shooting battle is only a portion of the game and the combat is going to happen every single game for the majority of the game. I started to think more about, if I'm bringing like Lake Town Mirkwood or Hobbits or like a Gondor list with a bunch of shooting in it, like this is cool, but I start to make army decisions based off of when the lines clash. Because a lot of the times if you're facing those lists at a tournament, I feel like someone with Mordor is going to have Gurrits in there, or they're going to have regular captains, and I feel like they're going to be in your face in 2-3 turns depending on the scenario. So at that point, the Shadow Lord's ability is gone. Dark Marshals is still there. Betrayer still has his buffs. Even Kamul's still getting back his stuff. So I still like the Shadow Lord. I just don't love him. I loved him in the last edition. He was probably my number 2 Wraith. But yeah, I don't know. He's still in the very usable category to me. I just, from an opponent's perspective, playing against him, I'm not so worried anymore. Ian, Mr. Shooter also?
It is what it is. I mean, I hate coming up against him because I always have max bows. Maybe that's why I put him higher.
Before we get to the rest of the segment, I just want to remind everyone to please like the video if you enjoy this content, and please consider subscribing to the channel as we have a whole bunch of new content coming your way, and subscribing means that you'll be notified whenever a new video is posted. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Now on to the rest of this segment.
The more and more that we are talking, the more I want to go with my original gut on the Dark Marshal, and that is to put him at position 5, exactly in the middle, because I think he does everything, and he just kind of does it all right. But I don't know who would have to move out of that position in my ranking for that. I don't know. Should we go through the list and try and all decide on what we think where everybody should be, having heard everything else?
Well, obviously we don't agree.
I think that's
on a lot of the
impossible.
rankings.
Can we come up with a definitive list?
I mean, to be
Average?
honest, like I have some very strong opinions about individual models, but at the end of the day, I feel like the Witch King has his own echelon. The next chunk of guys are all really, really close, like neck and neck, and then you have like the Dwemer Lake and the Knight of Umbar,
That's what
Could
I
we
said like 5 minutes beforehand. Right before Ian came in the chat, I was like, I have the Witch King at the top, I have the Knight of Umbar and the Dwemer Lake at the bottom, and I'm just trying to fill in the middle 6.
Can we settle on a top 3 then?
I don't think that's possible. You heard what Matt said
Is that
about
possible?
Kamul. I don't think we can settle on a top 3 because most of us think Kamul is up there, and Matt wants him removed from the game.
One thing I had in defense of Kamul is the way I see his Essence Leech rule is I see it as having a more consistent heroic strike. So a hero normally uses a might to roll and gain d6 fight value. He can spend a will and a might and start at fight 6 and then roll up. So I feel like that's like an option that's available to him only. I like how Kamul can start at fight 6. I think that makes him more consistent than the Witch King. I think they're about the same in terms of combat ability, but I think it's because Kamul has a more consistent heroic strike than the Witch King.
Yeah, and I think as well, like there's a couple wraiths on this list that can regain will, and even though he starts with 12, I feel like Kamul's way to get back will is a lot more consistent. Like, okay, we all know that Knight of Umbar's crap, but like his version is not even gain back will. It's I might not lose will, and then and then the Undying is like it's good, but again, you have to build a very specialized list with a lot of casters, and you have to put them all very close together. So I feel like Kamul is the one that will consistently get you a good chunk of will every single game because he's going to be fighting. That's his role. So I feel like rather than the 12 will that he has, it's probably upwards of 15.
Let me ask you guys one question on this, specifically about like gaining back will. I keep hearing gaining back will about Kamul. When you're writing a list, if you were to use him, like what's your goal with him? Because his casting's at the lower tier ability of, casting, like the numbers, the basic numbers, right? And with Kamul, the whole idea is I think you're trying to kill stuff off. So he's constantly by your lines and he's constantly going to be in combat. I think it leaves you a little bit more prone to, being countercharged with a lost heroic roll-off or something like that. I guess the whole point of what I'm getting after is there's definitely 2 tiers of rates. Some that are just getting into combat and fighting all the time, and then support casters. So having the will back is really cool for him, but you're going to have to chuck a lot of dice if you really want him to cast spells correctly, right? So I guess I'm just seeing guys like the Shadow Lord, the Dwemer Lake, the Witch King, whatever. They're all excellent casters that could support from the rear. And those are the guys who'd probably be better off having such a great ability to get their will back. But I see all the will coming back to Kamul, and I'm just like, well, you could have a guy who gets his will back and fights well, or you could just have somebody who fights well and also casts. I don't know, but I guess I'm just asking, like, what is your goal with that?
I kind of see him more like a hero that's a combat hero that has the option for magic. So, for example, kind of like Mouth of Sauron. Like, you're not going to cast every turn. You'll throw some transfixes in there early on, compels, when you have above 10 will. And then as you get closer to the game, or if you don't wound very many things and you're at low will, then you're just a pure combat hero. I think it really depends on your targets, really. Like, if you can pick your targets with a Fell Beast and charge who you want, you might not even need to transfix them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. He kind of is just like the combat guy, but then he can also just say, oh, I'm going to throw, 3 dice at this compel, and I'm going to pull you forward to make my job easier. And then he goes and kills the target he wants to go after, right? So he kind of combines those two things into one. Because obviously you can pick another model to do what he does better, right? You could ally in a Spider Queen, but then you don't get the versatility of also being able to have magic that he can cast, right? Could we agree on a top 3?
I just told you no.
So I mean, maybe not the whole thing, but I would say generally we'd have the Witch King.
Number 1.
Yeah. We'd probably have the Betrayer in there, right?
Everyone except Alex put Betrayer in the top 3.
I did say the Tainted and the Betrayer could probably be in swap places, so I could agree that the Betrayer should be 3rd.
Okay. Yeah, we can agree that the Betrayer is in top 3.
Being the most hateful Kamul representative here, I mean, I did have him at 6, right? And I talked about the fact that, you have these roles with these Ringwraiths at that level, and Kamul's an excellent combat wraith if that's what you're going for. I think he's also not somebody who you have to be so situational with, like the Tainted, for example. I mean, you know how we give you a hard or soft Hero of Valor here? I'll give him a very soft back of the 3rd place if we could just agree on that one.
Okay, I think I would take that.
This is the best I could do here.
I'm looking at all the lists, the top 3 that we have for everybody. So the only other contender would be the Dark Marshal, the Tainted, Kamul, or the Shadow Lord. So there's 4 contenders for the last spot in the top 3.
I don't think Tainted, since the Tainted is 7th for 3 of us.
And it's going to be Kamul.
We think Kamul? Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we should be trying to agree on the top 3. If we're trying to find some middle ground, I feel like agreeing on the bottom 2 is already good enough. Yes, we hate those guys.
Bottom 2, yeah.
So we have the Witch King, the Betrayer, top 2, Dwemer Knight of Umbar, bottom, and the rest just, good sandwich material.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you put the tomato on top of the
Unnamed
lettuce, or do you put the lettuce on top of the tomato? Does it matter?
This has been a really cool discussion. Listeners, we'd like to know what your rankings for these 9 Ringwraiths are as well. If you want, please share your ranking on our Facebook page. And Matt, thanks again for coming on to the podcast to talk to us today.
Yeah, I can't thank you guys enough. I had a blast. Nice different change of subjects. Good to see you guys again and talk again. Obviously, I'm a fan as much as I am a guest, or more so, I should say. So I look forward to hopefully being on again one day and to listening to more of your podcasts.
Awesome. Thank you all for listening, and look forward to the next episode of Into the West podcast.